Good morning, everyone. It's good to be back with you again. It's been a while, huh? Couple months. Lots happened since the last time I was with you. We had the holiday season, of course. We had the New Year's. And there was something else, I think. Oh yeah, we had a baby. Uh, it's good to be here with you though, and really blessed to have had things going the way they've been going within the last few months. I don't know about you, but there are times where it seems like things are really difficult, and then there are times where it seems like things are just kind of going okay. And that's been the kind of situation that we've been having. We're very blessed for that. I know it won't last for forever, uh, but it is good to be with you guys and to see you all doing well. It seems as though you are all in good spirits every time I see you. And so we look forward to being with you whenever we have the chance. I was just at a training recently, actually on Wednesday, um, about mental resilience in law enforcement. It's primarily geared towards police officers, but I went because I knew of the speaker beforehand, and I knew some of the officers that I work with were going to go. So I wanted to go too, and so I went, and some things came up that struck me a little bit, and so I'd like to share some thoughts with you that kind of came after that time on Wednesday. Some of my thoughts actually very, very closely tie in with some of the things that Mr. Manganello pointed out on the table. And so it is interesting how sometimes the theme kind of works with other things that people are thinking. The speaker at the lecture on Wednesday brought up John 15:13, which says, greater love has no one than this, than that one lay down his life for his friends. In context of the discussion, the speaker was making a point about that love to lay down your life for a friend. And he was comparing it to what we expect a lot of times from our civil servants. He brought up Audie Murphy. Audie Murphy was a World War II veteran, one of the more decorated soldiers, American soldiers from World War II. He was a Medal of Honor winner for actions that had taken place in eastern France. He had single-handedly contested a German advance of a very sizable force, and then basically led a counterattack. And for that, he was given the Medal of Honor. And when he was asked about why he did what he did, why would you risk your life the way that you did, doing these spectacular things? His answer was, they were killing my friends. And the speaker brought that idea up to point out that soldiers form a bond. The camaraderie makes it easy, or at least motivates them in many cases, to sacrifice for each other. And the speaker pointed out that when it comes to police officers, firefighters, medics, first responders, those people are often sacrificing themselves for people they don't know. And so if it's true then, and it of course is, Jesus said it, that greater love has no one than to lay down their life for a friend, what does it say about the love required to lay down one's life for a stranger? This thought was intriguing to me. I've thought about it before. And so I went up to the speaker afterward and I spoke with him a little bit about Romans chapter 5. Let's turn over to Romans chapter 5. We're going to spend some time looking at 3 verses. Not a very long lesson, I don't think, this morning, but hopefully we will make some observations that are helpful to you. Starting in verse 6, for while we were still helpless, at the right time Christ died for the ungodly. It's a very straightforward verse, but it forms the foundation upon which Paul is going to make a couple of observations that are very important, because these kinds of observations cause Christianity to stand apart from other philosophies and other religions in the world because of what you see in the verses to come. Verse 7, one will hardly die for a righteous man, though perhaps for the good man someone would dare even to die. But God demonstrates his own love toward us in that while we were yet sinners, Christ died for us. Verse 6, I would submit, is very straightforward. Pretty easy to understand what Paul's getting at there. But the meaning of verse 7, I think, is a bit more obscure. And the reason that it's more obscure is because we use words that Paul uses in verse 7, and colloquially, we don't use them the way that Paul's using them, or the way that his audience would have understood those words. The idea of verse 7 centers around the distinction between righteous and good. We often use those words interchangeably, but those words are not completely interchangeable. Righteous, the Greek word there that is translated righteous, is dikaios. It's a word which means innocent, virtuous, upright. In this context, the word rightly could be understood to mean one who adheres to God's law, blameless. The word that's translated good is a different Greek word, the word agathos. It means useful, distinguished, beneficent, or benevolent, one who has utility. Did you catch the distinction? No one would die, or at least see the need to hazard death, for a righteous person. The righteous person is innocent and blameless and has assurance in death. And so, in the off chance that the righteous person faces death, they are assured of a reward in death. There is no need to die for the righteous person. And many people would look at that person and not be inclined, not be motivated to die for that person. This also speaks to the sort of social norms of the time, where righteousness was kind of divided into a few different subsets. And we're not really going to talk much about that, but suffice it to say that at the time, a person who was righteous might have had an attitude of sort of do what they're supposed to do, but harm no one. Do nothing for anyone else. Do nothing against anyone else. Neither giving nor taking. And so in that sense, people may not be inclined to die for that person just because of the fact that they are righteous. They are sort of an island unto themselves, for lack of a better description. One might risk death for someone who is good. And what is meant here by the term good is one who has shown great generosity. I would be inclined to die for someone that has utility to me, someone who has shown care, kindness, compassion, generosity to me. I might be motivated to die for that person. When I was in the military, we would do what we called CBR exercises. CBR is an acronym. It means chemical, biological, radiological. And obviously, at the time, a lot of doctrine, the last 20 years or so, a lot of military doctrine has formed around this because it was something that was a point of concern. And so we would exercise what we would do if we encountered these kinds of threats. And that entailed us having to put on a whole bunch of protective equipment, wearing gas masks, and we would be miserable in the hot Mississippi sun practicing these drills, taking our gear on and off. And when we put the gear on, you don't get to just take it off, right? If there's a chemical agent that's released and you have to put this gear on, there are very specific things the unit has to do to get that gear off. And so we would go about doing our survey, make sure we can find the agent if it's there. We're going to decontaminate individuals or equipment that's been exposed to it. And after a while, we would then begin the process of starting slowly to take off our equipment, but we wouldn't just all start taking off our equipment. You couldn't have 200 people, you see, take off their gas masks only to realize that there was some agent that was undetected, and now the entire unit is suffering from whatever the effects of that agent would be. And so we would designate one person to take off their gas mask. And this was quite an affair, you see. There's only one person in our unit who was given the authority to order anyone to take off their gas mask. He was the commanding officer. And so during these exercises, there would be a sort of procession of some of the highest ranking officers in the battalion, the highest ranking enlisted person. We'd have the chaplain. We'd have a bunch of medical staff. Someone who was going to be near or friends with the person who was going to take their gas mask off would try to discreetly and subtly take their weapon away from them. That was a point of concern, you see. And once all that's been done, the CO would tell this person, you got to take off your gas. And then they would observe and see what happened. Would it surprise you to know how the unit chose this person. Whoever that person was to be the person who was the most non-essential. The most non-essential member of the unit would be exposed to the greatest risk of being the first person to take off their gas mask in the aftermath of a potential chemical, biological, or radiological threat. That person would be risking death, hazarding personal harm for the greater utility of the unit. By definition, everyone else in the unit has something more that they're doing for the unit. And so this person is going to give up their life potentially for all of those other people. That's kind of the idea, what Paul's talking about here. We may not be willing to die for a righteous person. We might see no need to sacrifice ourselves for a righteous person. But we would see a need, or at least we would see the benefit of sacrificing ourselves for a good person, a person who has utility. We do understand this, I think. We do sometimes use these words that way. Think of all the people you know that you would refer to not as righteous, but as good. Lots of people. You may have a neighbor who's not a believer, and you would tell people that person is a good person. That person's kind. They're concerned with the well-being of others. They're generous. We understand the distinction that Paul's getting at in these terms, although we probably don't use these terms that way all the time anymore. Verse 8 really is the payoff. Verse 8 is why it all matters. God demonstrates his own love toward us in that while we were yet sinners, Christ died for us. You see the payoff. The point of Paul's observations in these verses is that we were neither innocent nor did we have utility. We were neither righteous nor good when Christ died for us. And that's how God has demonstrated his great love for us. How much love does God have for our souls? Turn to Luke chapter 15. I'm sure verses that we're all familiar with, parables that Jesus gave, starting in verse 4. What man among you, if he has 100 sheep and has lost one of them, does not leave the 99 in the open pasture and go after the one which is lost until he finds it? When he has found it, he lays it on his shoulders, rejoicing. And when he comes home, he calls together his friends and his neighbors, saying to them, rejoice with me, for I have found my lost sheep, or my sheep which was lost. I tell you that in the same way, there will be even more joy in heaven over one sinner who repents than over 99 righteous persons who need no repentance. There again, Jesus getting at that same kind of idea that Paul was observing. Righteous people need no repentance. Righteous people need no death, no sacrifice for them. Verse 8, or what woman, if she has 10 silver coins and loses one coin, does not light a lamp and sweep the house and search carefully until she finds it? And when she has found it, she calls together her friends and neighbors, saying, rejoice with me, for I have found the coin which I had lost. In the same way, I tell you, there is joy in the presence of the angels of God over one sinner who repents. God, and according to Jesus, the angels care about the souls of sinners. And we know that. That's not anything groundbreaking. I'm not telling you anything that you didn't know. But I do think it's interesting to consider the kind of love that God showed, the kind of love that Christ showed. And there is, as I thought about it this week, there is a parallel there between our civil servants, the people who protect us, potentially laying down their lives. We looked at an example, and I don't want to belabor this point too much because I do have a couple of other observations to make, but we looked at an example of an individual. His name was, I think, Officer Amoroso. He was an NYPD officer during 9/11. And there's a picture of him. If you Googled it, you would see it. It's a picture of him. He looks absolutely gassed, totally haggard. He has already been in the World Trade Center twice, and he's coming out with a woman who is making her way out of the World Trade Center. And you can see just the exhaust, the fatigue, the dread on both of their faces. And this officer has already made that trip twice. And seconds after the photograph, he's about to make that trip a third time. And the tower would fall with him in it. That's the kind of love that's out there. We do see it in the world. But most importantly, for our purposes today, we see this love from God. And I think that has implications for us as Christians. The kind of love that we should have for people, the kind of love that we should show. And we should also, and this is really the point I want to make today, we should also understand the great value that God sees in us to have done this. Look at Acts chapter 20. In verse 28, we read, "Be on guard for yourselves and for all the flock, among which the Holy Spirit has made you overseers, to shepherd the church of God, which he purchased with his own blood." There was a price. 1 Corinthians 6, 19 and 20 will tell you about that price. And it culminates in verse 20. "Do you not know that you were bought at a price? Therefore glorify God in your body." You were bought at a price. What was that price? Well, in Acts, we can see that it's his own blood. But let's get a greater sense of that. Turn to 1 Peter chapter 1. In 1 Peter chapter 1, we begin in verse 18. "Knowing that you were not redeemed with perishable things, like silver or gold, from your futile way of life, inherited from your forefathers." There again, Peter making an observation here about the state we were in when we were redeemed. We were redeemed with something beyond this perishable currency that we're so that we like so much here while we're on earth. We were redeemed by something imperishable, and we were redeemed while we were in a very futile state. Verse 19, "with precious blood," not just his own blood, precious blood, as of a lamb unblemished and spotless, of Christ. This was precious blood. This was a very costly purchase. And I am staggered to think of the exchange rate. Paul says we were neither righteous nor good. Lacking in utility, we were not innocent. We were not beneficent. We were not kind. We were sinners. We were dead, Ephesians chapter 2 tells us. And yet, this terrible price, precious blood, was offered up to purchase us. We talk about inflation today. Inflation is something on everybody's mind. It makes things harder. But I'll tell you, brethren, the sacrifice of Christ is one thing that continues to appreciate in value. It's a purchase that becomes more valuable as time goes on. And I think how valuable it becomes with each passing day of my life. Every transgression, every mistake, every sin committed, with each day, the sacrifice of Christ becomes more valuable, more costly. And Paul anticipates this in Romans, the logical conclusion being, well, we should just keep sinning because it just becomes more and more valuable. Grace abounds. Paul tells us that's not the attitude that we're to have. And so we have this great paradox, don't we? We're left with a paradox. We were worthless, but Christ died for us. God paid a precious price for us. And nothing is worth more than our soul. Nothing is more valuable than our soul. How can two things be true at once? How can we be so worthless and our soul be so valuable? Mark chapter 8, verse 36 and 37. "What does it profit a man to gain the whole world and forfeit his soul? What will a man give in exchange for his soul?" There is nothing that you can give that has the same value or greater value than your soul. And so you were dead. You had enmity between you and God. You were a stranger, excluded from the commonwealth of Israel, according to Ephesians chapter 2. And even in that state, there was a purchase made for you. And I love the second question that Jesus asks there in verse 37. What will a man give in exchange for his soul? Obviously, Christ has not yet gone to the cross. The question that he asks is, is fascinating to think about, that he asks them that question, knowing what God would give in exchange for a man's soul, an exchange that was about to be made. Christ knew what would be exchanged. He knew that he could pay the cost, and he paid it. And so, what I want you to think about as we observe all of these things is the tremendous value that we each have. We have a tremendous amount of value within us. Turn to 2 Corinthians chapter 4. And I want you to think as we leave this place how you're using that value. How are you using it? Are you the kind of person that we would describe as righteous? That's good. Are you the kind of person that we could also describe as good, loving, caring, compassionate, giving? That's also good. As Christians, we are servants. We ought to be serving the people around us. We ought to imitate the attitude of Christ. And in 2 Corinthians chapter 4, we get kind of another illustration of this paradox that we're talking about here. In verse 16, we do not lose heart, but though our outer man is decaying, our inner man is being renewed day by day. Our outer man, the part of us that we each see, the part of me that you can hear speaking to you right now, the part of me that you can shake hands with, that part is slowly withering away. And one day it will die. But the inner man, the part of me that you cannot see, the part of each of us that cannot be seen, that's the part Christ died for. And that part is being renewed, revived by God day by day. And so as this outer husk, this outer shell weakens and wanes, the soul endures and grows. Verse 17, momentary light affliction is producing for us an eternal weight of glory far beyond all comparison. While we look not at the things which are seen, but at the things which are not seen, for the things which are seen are temporal, but the things which are not seen are eternal. Each of us in the outer man works, gathers possessions, finds comfort in hobbies, seeks comfort in this life at times. The things that we do, we enjoy the fruits of our labor, but that outer man is going to die. And the inner man has no need for those things. The inner man is being built up for eternal glory. The things that we see are temporal. The things that we do not see are eternal. And so, if I were to title this lesson, I don't know what I would title it. I don't know that it's really necessarily anything that is innovative or new to you. But I'm fascinated to consider this morning the fact that we were lacking in so much, and yet we are being built up for eternal glory now because of that price that God paid for us. It's a wonderful thing to consider. And we ought to think about that and live our lives with that in mind. And so I hope that you do that in the days, the weeks to come. I hope that you eagerly look for ways to serve both each other and to serve people out there, because that's how we're going to gain opportunities. And that's how we're each going to grow, and we're going to be built up. And whatever trials come out there, know that they're passing. Know that this life is going to fade away, and eternal glory is what waits for us. But it waits only for those who have responded to the gospel through obedience and faith. And so I would commend any of you here who has not yet responded in obedience by being baptized into the name of Christ, putting on Christ, being clothed in him, receiving the adoption. Now's the time to do that. And if you're not sure or you have questions, those questions can be answered. There are many here with knowledge and ability to teach. And if there's any here who have any needs, any prayers, or need any support from the congregation, that's why we're here. I would ask only that you make these needs known to us at this time now as we stand and as we sing.